Let's see. All right, here we go. I am talking to myself over here on mute and I realized that you couldn't hear me. So I put into the chat the link to both the slides and the link to the template that we're going to be using for today. So if you look into the chat, you'll see both of those links in there, and I'll be recording the session. So anybody who misses it should have the links as well. I'll put them in an email. So thanks for joining today. This is our budgeting basics for social entrepreneurs and nonprofit leaders. There are two links in the chat. One is for the template we'll be using for today. It's a budget template that I created for you. And then you also will have access to download the slides. The slides are here for you as a resource because it is quite complex, some of this stuff, and you might want to refer back to them. I don't normally give away the slides, so I'd ask that you please don't share them, but they are there for you if you've taken the webinar in person or as a recording, that you'll be able to look back at these slides. And if you have any questions later, you can reach out to me somehow online. So that's what we're doing today. We are talking about budgeting basics for social entrepreneurs and nonprofit leaders. The reason that I wanted to create this particular webinar is because there are a lot of people who don't like to work with budgets or don't know what they're doing when they go to create a budget, and it can get quite complicated, and it doesn't need to be. So what you're going to learn today is something that I've taught as a technique to my grantees every year as they were developing their budgets for their nonprofits or for their social businesses. And as we did that work, I was working in the federal government for about 15 years, overseeing grants, and I always wanted to make sure that they were as successful as possible at understanding how much money they were spending and how to better use their money every year. So the reason I am teaching this is because it's helpful for you as a social entrepreneur to understand how money works for you to impact and make social change. So our goals are often what drives the amount of money that we need to do something. And one of the reasons we need to understand this is so we can ask people for that money, whether that is getting money from consumers by selling products and explaining our impact through our business, or that is through a nonprofit and talking to funders and donors and asking for grants. It also could be helpful to better serve our clients and understanding efficiencies and how we can remain solvent as social entrepreneurs and organizations. And then lastly, as we grow and how we scale when we want to get to a certain level, understanding how your budget needs to grow over time is going to be really important. So who determines what your budget is? Usually it's whoever is in charge of your finances and your decision making. That could be boards, it could be a CEO, it could be a number of different organizational options, but it really depends on who is working on this. If this is a budget for a particular program, then it might be the program itself or the coordinator of that program who creates the budget. So it just depends on what you're trying to do and who is with you to do this work. But if you're here watching this particular webinar, more than likely you were the person who is going to be creating a budget in some way. So we're going to talk about why you would want to do that. First things first, as social entrepreneurs, we want to create sustainable ventures. And this is where a lot of the time when we stop receiving funding for a particular issue or for a particular cause, then the work goes away. So we want to make sure that as businesses and nonprofits, we're continuing to do the good work that we're doing and that we don't run into some of these barriers in sustaining our work. And a lot of these might look familiar. This is part of the work that I do is my sustainability framework. So if you're familiar with my blog or other work, this is some interesting things that I talk about a lot, and you can go ahead and check that out. It looks a little bit like this. There's 8 layers of sustainability. And as we're doing things like communicating to our different audiences and using our marketing techniques to reach people, we need to know how much money we're spending to do those kinds of things. When we're doing leadership and development with our boards or our staff, we need to have a budget to do those kinds of things. When we're investing in programs that work and divesting in strategies that don't work, we need to understand where our money is going. And as we're creating long-term change, we need to understand how much money we need to create that change. Of course, we have partnerships and opportunities to leverage additional funding streams, so that's always important as well. And then if we're thinking about the root causes of our work and how we can address risk and protective factors, we can often put our money towards things like prevention that are a little bit more cost effective in the long run. And the last thing I wanted to mention is equity, always thinking about how do we use our funding to promote equity and to make equitable access to services and products. So this is important work in terms of how we use money to promote sustainability, but also in all of these 8 dimensions, having the right mindset about how we use our money and our budgets is really important to promote each of these components of sustainability as well. And the one thing that I always like to tell people is that you have to have a coordinated and complementary funding set of funding that you're working with. So whether that's grants or donations, or that's direct business that you're soliciting and revenue you're soliciting, these are things that have to be coordinated with sustainability in mind so that you know how much money you need consistently to operate. So very, very important to have a set of funding that you're looking at rather than one funding stream you're completely dependent upon. Because like I said before, if that goes away, that's not helpful. So these are some basic concepts that I want to bring to budgeting and to the conversation today, because this is important background work to do as an organization before you come to the budget conversation. We'll jump into the actual budgeting and looking at the template and how you use it, and how you fill it out in a second. But these background pieces are really here so that you can better understand when you're working with your organization on a decision-making level, how do you talk about money openly? How do you talk transparently about budgets? And then how do you explain that to the people that you serve? So if you are a social entity, there's likely people that are receiving your products, your services, your programs, whatever. And as they are going through those things, it's important for you to communicate to them how much money you've dedicated towards certain priorities as an organization. So that's where your budget can really be helpful to really strengthen your relationship with the people that you're serving. The other part that I have to teach as background is how do we get to social change? And this is my model that I teach in my planning workshops. So I'm bringing together my sustainability workshops and my planning workshops into this budget workshop so you have a better understanding of where we're coming from in talking about this conversation today. So we're always thinking about what actions are we taking? How do we measure those actions as being successful? And then how do we explain that success, right? So these are the basic concepts of how we explain our social entrepreneur journey to people. We take our action, we measure it, and we tell people about it, right? Then when we tell people about it, we hope to inspire more action. So it kind of cyclically goes around. We start that by thinking about our aspirational vision. Well, what if we were to project out social change, what that looks like for us in our organization as we're creating it? What is that vision? And as we're thinking 3 to 5 years about our aspirational vision, what kinds of changes would you see in your social business or your nonprofit and in the work that it's doing? As you go from there, thinking about developing a strategic plan that will get you to that vision. And then assessing the economics of, does this plan make sense? And this is where the budget comes in. When you are aligning your actions and your measurement and your budget, all of those three things together support one another. And when you have too much action and not enough budget, you'll see that your agency won't be solvent. When you have measurement that's telling you, hey, you need to do more, and you're not budgeting as much as you need to, then you're not going to make as big of an impact as you possibly could, right? So budget and money really tells you a lot of important indicators when you compare it to your actions and your measurements. And when you're doing this kind of a continual quality improvement, which we call continuous quality improvement, when you're doing this kind of work over time, as you're doing it 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road, and you're seeing social change, you have the ability to track it and explain it to people and look at how it's happening. So it's really important to think of these things as linear concepts that support each other. And as you're doing the work, each of these things is equally important. So you don't want to not invest in measuring, not have an evaluation for your services, and then take a bunch of action and don't know if it's effective or not. Because as I said before, for sustainability reasons, we want to make sure that we're taking action on the things that are effective, not the things that are not effective. And lastly, as we're creating long-term social change and we're able to measure that impact, we're able to compare back to where we came from, right? So we want to have a baseline and understanding. This is where the problem was before we did a bunch of work. We took all of our action and then we moved the needle forward, hopefully for the better over here, right? Or if it didn't move, we have an understanding of what happened. Maybe our actions were misaligned, or we weren't serving the right people, or we weren't serving in the right way. So all of these things are considerations around budget. And it seems like you're probably going, what does all of this have to do with numbers, right? All of these concepts support one another when you're thinking about how to put the numbers on the paper. So as you're translating this vision in your head into numbers on a paper, you have to understand what is your strategic plan to get to that vision. What makes financial sense in terms of how much money you need or how much money you want to invest at this moment, given what your organization is capable of doing at this moment, right? As you grow and maybe have more staff, have more services, your organization might be capable of holding a larger budget. That's great, but you need to understand how you're getting there and when you get there. So that's why a lot of these other concepts come into play to make sure that your budget is really what you want it to be. Oh, of course, this is never without fail. For some reason, always has spacing issues. Okay, so the ways that I tell people you can explain your impact: dollars, people, time, and donations. I don't know why this became 10. Oh, because he's there. There we go. Let's do one more of these spacing things. Here we go. So there we go. Dollars, people, time, and donations. This is what you're able to, as a social entrepreneur, explain your impact. And I wanted to bring impact into the conversation about budget as well, because when we are scaling things, when we're trying to serve a certain amount of people, we're trying to reach a certain number of people, make an impact that's measurable. Well, a lot of the time we might focus on, say, throwing money at the problem, but we may not really actually be serving the people, right? Or we might be spending a lot of time doing something, but when we're spending all of that time, we're actually wasting dollars because we're not serving people in the right way. So explaining your impact and thinking about everything you do in terms of time, people, dollars, people, time, and donations. Even for a social business, donations is actually effort, time, energy going out. For a nonprofit, that might be actually coming in. So either way, whether you're a business or a nonprofit, this model makes sense for you to use to think about how your impact works. Now, when you're budgeting to make an impact, there's kind of a clear way you would hope that this would work, and it's not always how it works. Usually what happens is somebody says, I need money and here's a grant and I want to make a budget for this grant. And then they go, okay, well, I wanted to already do this set of activities or this set of things. So I'm just going to put all the things I want to do in this grant and then put it in the budget. And then I'm going to send it away and tell somebody to give me money, right? That's typically what happens. But if we were doing this from an intentional perspective, it would look a little bit different. We would ask ourselves first, with the vision we have in mind, how much money do we need to do what we want to do? So when we're trying to create this budget, we want to start from the space of understanding that it's for us to get to the vision and for us to make a certain impact. And in order to scale it correctly now and in the future, we need to know what that looks like. So we start with our clear vision. Then we understand, well, how many people or how many things, what does that look like when I'm providing the services or goods to whom I want to provide them to? So whether that's a community or a school or to one set of people within the community, we have to understand who those people are and what's happening with them in order to understand how much help to provide, right? So as a social business, we're thinking about impact that we can provide through our services or products. As a nonprofit, we might be thinking about our services and programs that we are helping people with, right, or helping a cause with. So understanding that part is the second piece. And then you want to understand how much, right? So how much more do we need to help than what's already going on right now? This is more of a quantitative issue. People often get stuck here and they can't finalize their budget because they don't know how much help to provide, right? And so we're thinking about how much in terms of number of months or number of units. And I'll explain this in a little bit when we look at the template. This matters, the how much question really matters, and we'll dig into it a little bit further, but that would be part of this equation of how we get to a budget. So knowing who we're going to help, how we're going to help them, and how much help we're providing. Then we have to determine, well, how much does it cost to help each one, right? So each person, each dog, each thing that I'm trying to help, how much does that cost? And then we would multiply the number of people, things, dogs we want to help. That's our target, times the number of how much each unit costs to help, and that would be our budget, right? So this is a very simplistic thought process to say, okay, what am I trying to do and how much is it going to cost me? But as I said before, this is not linear. And usually this thinking does not happen. And you usually come into the conversation from one part or another, right? Saying, okay, in order to provide this service, I need to train this many people. And in order to train this many people, it's going to cost me this much, right? And so you might have just that information to start with and nothing else. So you really don't always get the luxury of knowing the vision or knowing where you're going or having an idea where you're going and how much money it's going to cost you from the beginning. That is a luxury if you're able to get all that information and use this type of thinking or this type of logic. If you cannot, you can enter the conversation from wherever you want, but you have to get as much information as possible in order to move forward and create an actual budget. So there's a couple different things I wanted to talk about today as well that are definitions of that you need to know for basic budgeting. And if you're just starting out, have not ever developed a budget before, don't worry, I'm going to explain some of these things, but there are tons of resources online that you can look at. So the first part is understanding your organization's budget is different from the budget for a particular activity, service, or program. Your organization's budget is really based upon your annual expectation for your entire organization, whether that's a nonprofit or a social business, it doesn't matter. You're keeping track of all of the funding streams coming in and all of the expenditures going out. And you'll likely have some sort of ledger with a code that tells you how to read that. And you'll likely have some reports that tell you what's going on at the organizational level. And you should have a process annually that helps you review what you're doing. So whether that's how much you're spending or how much revenue you have coming in, there should always be an annual review of this for the entire enterprise, right? So your organizational budget usually includes all of the funding sources. It might be grants, it might be sales revenue, donations, profit, all of these things that you hear about from the business nonprofit side coming in. Those are all the funding sources that are coming into this organizational budget. Going out is every expense that you have as an organization. So this is the very macro level budget for your functioning. This is not what we are going to talk about today. What we are going to talk about is one layer below that, which is a budget for a particular service or a product or some program or project that you were doing. So this budget is a little bit different because it's really based on the activities that you're doing. So this is what's known as an activities-based budget. It's typically something that you would have to allocate a set of resources in order to do this particular activity. Usually it's based on an annual perspective where every year more money comes into the budget for this particular activity. And it's usually prioritized by what is our vision or our goals. And that's why when we talked about goals and vision in the beginning of this, it's really important for us to understand what our vision and our goals are. Usually it's for a new program, product, or service that we might be creating this activities budget for the first time. We might be doing it for a grant application or to audit something. We might also be using zero-based budgeting for resource allocation, which requires us to say every year you have to justify this money coming to this program or activity. So every year someone has to say, we need money for this. And in order to give that money, they have to explain, say maybe how they did in the past or what their performance is. And then they'll be able to get access to the money that they need for this budget. So it's a very different activities-based budget versus the organizational budget is very different because when you are looking at activities-based budget, it's only a fraction or a segment of the overall organization's budget. The organization's budget might include 5 different activity-based budgets plus an overhead budget, right? So there's tons of other options depending on how your organization is set up, but it's important for you to know the difference between the overall and then one particular portion that's dedicated to accomplishing a portion of your vision or accomplishing your vision in its totality, but through services and programs. So this also is called a line item budget. And the line item budget means that we are going all the way down to the smallest segment of your budget, which is called a line item. And those are the expenses that you accumulate according to the particular areas or lines or line items that you have on your balance sheet. So what that means is as you are creating expenses for the different programs and services that you provide, there are particular things you are paying for. Each one of those little things that you are paying for can be created into a line item. So that might be your computers, that might be your phones, your staffing, those kinds of things are line items. We then can roll those all up into what's called a cost category. And sorry if you can hear a big giant truck going by. The cost categories are really where we look at types of line items that go together and we make a subtotal. So this subtotal is the sub estimate for just these types of line items. And we'll look at what these cost categories are in just a second, but it's how we group costs so that we can better organize and understand them. We also can analyze them. And there's a lot of reasons why we use cost categories. But the other thing I will say is that if you are applying for a federal grant, federal grants require you to use line items and cost categories, which is one of the reasons why I made sure to include that in this training. Then we have an overview. The overview might give you the summary for an annual budget, like the 1 year that we're talking about today. And you might be able to take a summary and pull them all together and have a summary of multiple years. So an budget overview usually has a summary section where you're looking at, from a larger perspective, say all of the budget for 1 year or all of the budget for several years for one particular activity, service, or program. So you may have a 5-year budget for one program, but then you have 7 programs and each of them have a 5-year budget, right? And you're hoping to raise money for all 7 of those over the course of the 5 years. So this can get quite complex when you're looking at it from an enterprise perspective. And that's why when we're looking at it from just activity or service or program level, we're able to dig into these line items and really understand what's going on from a performance perspective if we're looking at expenditures, or from a budgeting perspective and forecasting if we're looking at how many people we're serving. So there's a lot of reasons why we want to do this level of budgeting. Now, here's what I mentioned before. These are the federal cost categories. The federal cost categories are ways that we better understand our budgets. And even here, I kept one off because it's not as commonly used. These are the ones that I want to make sure that people understand. So salaries is our staff and the people that we're paying directly on our books, right? So people that are contracted are not in the salaries. Salaries are people that we are paying directly. The fringe benefits that go along with those salaries. So if we have some sort of insurance, if we have unemployment insurance, other things that are getting calculated into how much it costs to provide this service might be how much fringe benefit these people who are paying and how much they need every year and every month, right? Then our travel. So travel is if we are going to provide services, say mileage, we're going to go across town and provide services at another school district or another location, and people are driving to and from, they might incur mileage every day. They might also go to a training out of state and you would incur some sort of airfare and per diem and other costs related to that travel. Supplies are exactly as they sound, anything that's consumable and anything that you can expect that you would pay for them under a supply budget, but they're not above $5,000. So above $5,000 per item is known as equipment. It's something I didn't include in this framework because, like I said, it's very rare that people are buying equipment a lot of the times with grants. But if you're thinking about it, it's just something that you purchase over $5,000 per unit. So supplies are anything below $5,000 per unit. And supplies can have a ton of different things in them. And so we'll take a look at some of the things that might fall in supplies in a second. Contractual is like I said, anything you're contracting with somebody to provide for you, a consultant, a trainer, anything that you are going to have an outside organization that you pay for a service with this money, that would fall in the contractual category. Then there's the other category, that's all other expenses that don't fit anywhere else. Sometimes you'll see things like shipping that falls there, or you'll see just different random costs that people can't put in the other categories. And then we'll talk more about indirect costs in a second as well. So I'll leave that. Now, here is our framework for how do we know what line items to create. So when we're taking this vision and we have it in our head and we're saying, okay, we want to create a budget with what I need to do for this group of people or this particular social impact mission, I want to better understand how that's going to cost what that cost is going to look like every single day for every person, right? And in order to do that, I have to translate that vision out of my head and into these line items. And usually this is where people get stuck because they're not really thinking through all of the little things that it's going to cost you to actually be successful. So in order to be successful, you really have to ask yourself these three questions. Who am I serving? How am I serving them? And what costs am I forgetting? And the third one is really because usually you will not remember everything when you are budgeting, and you will go back and say, oh, I didn't even realize that that was going to cost me money. So from the beginning, you want to think about, who am I serving? And that is, I'm actually going to close this window because it's a ambulance. Hold on one second. So who am I serving is about what costs are associated with the service, product, or program that I'm providing. And that could be, who am I actually reaching out to, and how is it going to cost me to reach out to them, right? Or who am I trying to provide this service to, and what are their needs? And in order to better serve them, what do I need to do as an organization, right? So really understanding who am I serving and digging into that, and how you're going to serve them is important. So when you think about the how, it's okay, if I'm going to be successful at providing this to these people who I just committed to serving, what does that look like? And when I do that, what is that going to cost me to be successful, right? Because you can do it at different levels. So you might do it at one level and not be successful. You might do it at another level and be very successful. So you have to always think about what is going to make you actually reach the impact that you want to reach. And then what cost am I forgetting? I ask this question a lot because we sometimes think we know everything when we enter into these budget conversations, and we throw out all this information, but then we don't think about the day-to-day of what it's going to take to be successful at creating social change or moving a social issue forward. So when you ask yourself, what am I forgetting? This is about thinking about equity, thinking about access, thinking about what your staff need and their personal and professional development. All of these other costs might be things that you can put into a budget to be successful, and they might be helpful if you think of them ahead of time rather than after the fact. The other thing is, what are the indirect costs of providing this service or product? Sometimes we have things that we can't directly attribute to this program, but they are going to cost us, say our internet service, for example. So our internet service we might be using to sell multiple products online, or we might be using to reach multiple audiences for several programs. And it doesn't mean that it can be allocated to any particular program. It just means that we have an internet cost that we need to spread around, right? So there's indirect costs, and we'll talk more about that. Oh, this one definitely did not do what I wanted it to do. When you take these out of Canva, sometimes they do this. They do this really strange spacing thing. So let me space these out just a little bit. So there's some things that you want to think about when you're trying to, I think those are relatively legible. Move that. So when we're trying to translate things from ideas to dollars, and ideas to dollars, this is when we are taking the vision in our head and saying, okay, it's going to cost me a certain amount to do this thing. What exactly is that cost? And we have to think about who is doing it. So whether that's you as a solo entrepreneur, a solo nonprofit leader, or you have staff that you have hired to do something, there are going to be people who are dedicating time to doing this thing. If they're even volunteers, for example, it still is people who are going to be doing these things, and they might incur costs while they're doing this stuff that you want them to do. So what costs are directly associated with what I want to do every single year? And every single year might break down to every month, or it might break down to 9 months, for example, if you only work for part of the year for a school year. So what am I doing every year, and how much is it going to cost me to have this number of staff provide this particular service, right? So these people are doing this thing, and we are only budgeting for these people to do this thing, right? So this is, again, activity-based, one program, one project, one service. When we're looking at just this one project, program, service, what does it take to get this done? We might have a cost to purchase a desk. We might have to purchase a shared location in a WeWork, for example. There's phones, there's consultants and trainers. We might actually send them to out-of-state training. There's salaries for them, there's their fringe benefits, plus their supplies like their paper and their printer ink and those kinds of things. Like I said, there might be conference travel that we send them to. There might also be subscriptions for apps or software. I know for me, for my business, I have a ton of subscriptions for software just for myself, right? Imagine if I had 4 other staff, I would be multiplying that by 4 users. So you're thinking about these things in terms of how many people you have doing this thing you want them to do. When you want them to provide a service, what does that look like for them to actually provide the service? Are there raw goods that you need to purchase, or is there mileage that they're going to be incurring in order to go and serve the people you want them to serve? So there's a lot of considerations around this idea to dollars concept. And when you go to put all these things into your budget, you want to have thought through them in a meaningful way. In order to be successful, what are these costs, right? What are these line items? Each one of these things on this slide will turn into a line item in the budget, and we'll show you that in a second. Now, as I mentioned, there's something called indirect costs. You can see how this is, again, this spacing got kind of funky, but our indirect costs are something that we cannot directly attribute to this particular service. As I said, it might be our support staff, it might be building maintenance, it could be the lawn care for your facility, it could be your office space rent, phones that are shared across multiple people on their desks versus in their pocket, right? So there's a lot of different options for what could be an indirect cost. And when you're doing work with the government, they ask you to actually have a rate agreement with a government organization or entity that says what your indirect costs are. If you are not doing work with the government and you need to better understand your indirect costs, you can still use the government's model in order to calculate this. So it's really up to you how you do your indirect costs and what that looks like. But I just wanted to call attention to the fact that as an organization, you might have costs that you cannot attribute to any one of these services, products, or programs. Those are known as indirect costs, and they might be shared across several funding streams, or you might be looking to receive them at a certain percentage from every funding stream. So it just depends on what you as an organization have decided to do with this. Now, when you are looking at it from an impact perspective, this is what does it cost me to successfully provide services at this rate? And when I spend at that rate, what happens, right? So if I'm trying to reach this many people, 100 people, what does that cost me? If I'm trying to reach 1,000 people, what does that cost me? Then backing into, okay, so in order to serve 1,000 people with this particular service, how many staff do I need to provide, right? So how many staff will be successful at providing that service to 100 people versus 1,000 people, and what does that look like? So translating dollars to impact, you always have the opportunity to ask yourself different questions about how you are providing the service and the detail work in order to really get the expenditures correct. And then when you do that, you're thinking about things like, where is the service located, and do I need to pay for the service to be provided in a particular location? This might be something related to access. For example, if you are trying to work in a particular part of the community and there's not a lot of access to services there, or there's not a bus route, you might pay to provide services in a different part of the community at a higher rate because it's easier for people to get to you. There is a bus service that goes there. So you're always thinking through these kinds of questions, the types of services you provide. If this is an existing service or a new service for you as an organization, how long will you provide this service, or what is the duration of time that's required for people to really see a change? How many people will you reach, and how intense will that be, right? Well, is it 8 visits or 12 visits, or a model that has 2 visits and then case management, right? So like, what does this look like for you to help these people? Who is providing that service and who is helping, and how are they trained, and what level? Do you need a licensed person versus a not licensed person? And then are you paying for things like cultural adaptations, translation services, things like that, social media and information that's given in another language, because those are the people you want to serve. And if the population that you're trying to serve has specific needs, that you are calculating in how you're going to meet those needs. So if there's a need for childcare, for example, how are you going to calculate into the budget the ability to provide childcare so that the parents can come to parenting classes, right? Is there travel required, or will you need to go to the people, say, the people you're trying to serve are on a rural area in your county, and that part of the county is going to require you to travel 100 miles a day for each staff person. How are you adding that into your budget? So this is where we're going to look at the budget template, and I am going to pull that up. It is, and I'll drop it back in the chat again, just so you have it. And let's see, putting it back in the chat now. Oops, here, sorry about that. Let me actually make the wrong one. I just realized I need to make it a copy. Yep, I think that's it. Okay, that's a copy link, so you should be able to grab that. And when we're doing our budgeting, it's helpful to have a template to work from. This is a template that we developed at the federal level for grantees that I've adapted for my clients to use, and it's a little bit more simplified and straightforward. So what I've done here is created the cost categories that we talked about today in the federal budget, and just added lines for you to put the details that you need in order to fill in a completed budget. So let's go over those parts of the template, and then we'll look at a quick example, and then we'll open it up for question and answer. So this template starts with your personnel, and you're going to put the type of person that you're hiring. So if that is a coordinator or a project director, or yourself as a solopreneur, that is the person's position. Who is actually occupying that is the name of the person. Their annual salary is how much you would pay this person every year. And if this is something where it's an hourly rate, you can figure that out as well. So their level of effort might be 100% or 25%, because if they're not working 40 hours a week and they're only working a quarter of that, then that would be 25%. So the level of effort is often a percentage. Then the number of people. So if this is one person working at 100% at an annual salary of $40,000, the total cost is $40,000. So you'll fill this in with the details of how much it would cost you to provide the service successfully, and how, remember we talked about the staffing. So how many staff do you need in order to provide this service successfully? And then there's a calculation for the fringe benefits, which tells you what the benefit is, who is receiving it, how much is their salary, what is the rate for that benefit, and then it'll give you a total. Then if you have people traveling, there is a purpose for which people are usually traveling. If it's a conference, a training, whatever that is, you'll put, conference travel for XYZ curriculum. The item is hotel stay, and then the per unit cost is $120. We're going to spend 2 nights at this conference, and we're sending 4 people, right? And that total would just be the multiplication of all of those things. So as we go through this template, you'll see that it works really both in the column and the row sort of sense, but you have to make sure that you're filling in all of the pieces in order for it really to give you an accurate cost. So supplies, again, if you're talking about telephone service, this is for connectivity to the internet and to clients. Telephone service for each person is $50 a month. We have 12 staff, and then we're paying for that for 12 months, right? So 12 people times 12 months, 144 times our 50, and that would be our total. So this is how it gets filled in. And the last one, contractual, is a little different, because usually we'll have a rate for a contractor. It might be an hourly rate, a daily rate, whatever that is. And you would have how many days or how many hours they're working and how many contractors you have. So this is really where you put in kind of more of those big contracts that you might be providing for training or things like that. Here is the other. So again, thinking about what other things you could be providing that would fall in the other category. So these are all direct costs. This is a budget for 1 year, and this budget is for one activity, program, or service. So you are only putting in the personnel for that activity, program, or service. You are not putting in the personnel for every service you're providing. So depending on what you're doing, what your goal is, your budget may look different, and you could have, say, 5 staff in this budget, but then for a completely different service, you could have 25 staff in that budget, right? In total, your organizational budget is for 30 staff. So you're really looking at having multiple versions of this for multiple years, because this is just 1 year. Now, when you're looking to grow, the thing that you're going to do is say, okay, at the current rate, I am able to provide services for my 100 people, and it costs me this amount of money. And this is what your year 1 budget would be. In 5 years is when I want to get to my 1,000 people. And I want to better understand, in order to get to the 1,000 people, what will my budget look like then? I'll have to make a forecasted budget for that 5th year in order to understand how I'm going to serve 1,000 people. So if I know that each staff member serves a certain number of people, and I can total serve 100, I can use that same ratio to then figure out, well, when my goal is 1,000 people, how many staff do I need? So a lot of these budget creations are really about ratios and numbers and multiplying and better understanding when you change this factor, what happens on the other side. Now, indirect costs, as I mentioned, there's usually a category that you have calculated your indirect costs. You're saying, 15% of my salaries is what I am able to ask for from the federal government for indirect cost. So you would have your 15%, your total salaries that you've calculated, salaries would go here. And so you would then just total that out. So this is how the indirect cost chart works. It's a little different from the direct costs, which is why I put it in a completely separate tab by itself. So here's where we look at an example, and then we go to questions, and then we'll close out for the day. So this is what it will look like when it's filled in, and you'll have a tab in this Excel that kind of shows you how it works. So again, our positions with our people, the annual salaries, how much they're working, and then what is the number of staff that are going to be here providing this service. And these are, for no rhyme or reason, these are filled in with yellow, except for they just came that way from the example. So I'll fill them in with white. So these are the fringe benefits for those same people. Oops, this got a little bit messed up. These are supposed to be for these folks up here. Here we go. Let's move this up. I was finishing this up right before the session. So these are the totals for each of these segments. I'm gonna make sure that this is correct before I send this out to you guys again. But these are the travel rates, and you'll see here how this works when you're traveling different people, different costs as you go through it, number of units, number of days, number of people. So all of these are very easy to calculate. You really have them all here once you put them in from your ideas, once you get them out of your vision and you put them here into line items, then you're just going to sum using the formula. So let me show you that really quickly. It's basically just doing the sum formula here, and you're going to take the row number and the column, and you're just going to multiply them. And it's really simple. Times, what is this? D76, and that's it. So that's how you do that. And then if you want to, you can just use the formula to go down, and that's how you fill in the whole thing. So it's a very simple template. It's really easy to work with. All you have to do is go through the process of figuring out what you want to put in your budget by asking yourself all of those questions that we talked about in the beginning of the session, and then translating those into the line items that come here into the format. And the other part I wanted to mention is that this budget, this example budget, our goal is to increase mental health supports for students in 9 K through 12 schools in rural Nevada. So we've scaled it for that many schools, for the location, which is rural Nevada, and for the population we want to serve, which is young people in kindergarten through 8th grade in schools, enrolled in schools, right? So I've already answered, even with just this goal statement, several of the questions that we had earlier in the session about what is the purpose of this budget and who are we serving. So even with something as simple as this statement for what you're trying to accomplish for your budget will really help ground you in what you're going to put into the budget itself. And you can see that with the types of positions and the types of costs that are here in this particular example. So that is the workshop for today. I am going to go back to my slides very quickly because there's some things I wanted to talk about. So we'll go to questions in a second, but coming up, I have a couple different ways to work with me. One is through the Social Impact Mastermind. It is a 1-year hybrid program where I'm working one-on-one and through group coaching with a small number of social entrepreneurs. And by small, I mean 5. So there are only 3 more spots left for this program. And it's going to be an amazing growth experience for people over the course of a year where we will meet monthly. We will go through a process that I've gone through with multiple grantees to make them successful and sustainable in what they're trying to do with their social impact missions. So this is starting in July as well, and you have to book a call with me in order to get in. So if you're at all interested in figuring out what you're doing and moving forward over the course of a year, this is a very, very impactful program that will help you do that. So please reach out if you are interested. And I also have a monthly accelerator that I go through every month and help people clarify their vision, set priorities for how they're going to use their energy, and really move forward with the infrastructure of their social business or their nonprofit. It's 7.5 hours, 2 workshops, and a monthly meeting that you get invited to with all of my other clients. And we talk about, how you're going to motivate and manifest what you're trying to do with your vision. So this is a really important process. It's about $300 per person. And if you're interested in that, please also reach out. You can book it directly on my website and you'll get the link through that via email. I have a podcast on Apple and Spotify. It's the Social Impact Level Up podcast. I also talked about sustainability today. So here is the blog post link where I talk more about sustainability if that's interesting to you. And then I also have a newsletter on LinkedIn that you can subscribe to. So that is all the places that you can find me online. And then of course, tons of workshops coming up. Tomorrow, or not tomorrow, in 2 days is our SEO social media strategy workshop. There is a grant writing. There's 2 grant writing workshops coming up, and then the Level Up Accelerator in July. So these are all other places where you can come and learn for very low cost or free, and to get different types of skills that you need as a social entrepreneur. So I hope that you will think about coming back to another conversation and to join me for another workshop. So this is how you reach me. Here's my email address. You can find me at info@wendyveloz.com, or you can also find me on Instagram at Wendy Veloz, or on Clubhouse as well at Wendy Veloz. And those are the places I'm typically hanging out. So let's go back to questions. I know we only had 1 person today who's registered as Smart Chill. So do you have any questions based on the stuff that I presented, or anything that you want to have clarification? You can either put it in the chat and I'll pull that up, or you can feel free to come on unmiked and share. Hey, I see you there. Let's see. Hello.
I don't have any question. I'm going through the PowerPoint again to see, and I'll send you a message in the chat to let you know.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and just definitely reach out to me if you have any questions. But did you enjoy the presentation? Was it helpful for you and what you're trying to do?
Yes, it was. I have a nonprofit organization with my friend. We started a couple of years ago, and we've been handling our own budget, but having that spreadsheet definitely will really help. So I can't wait.
Good. What do you guys do in your nonprofit?
So it's a nonprofit for young professionals. We organize networking events. The networking events are either online or on site. We're located in Dallas, Texas, and we have multiple programs. We have a mentorship program, and we right now doing a fundraising for a scholarship that we having right now.
Oh, that's awesome. So I just moved back to Maryland from Houston, Texas. I was there for a little bit. Yeah. And so I'm familiar with a lot of those social programs that are going on down there for young people. It's awesome.
Yes.
That's great. Well, good. And so I also, I have the program that I was mentioning that's a year long for social entrepreneurs who are kind of in the earlier phases of starting their nonprofits and their social businesses. So I'll make sure that you get that information if you guys want to book a call with me and hear more about that, because that sounds like something that might help you guys move forward to growing the work that you're doing pretty quickly.
Yes, and also we want to know. I think I'll sign up as well for the grant writing.
Yes, please. I was going to say that.
We definitely, because we've been struggling
Yeah.
with that one. That's
So let me tell you the difference between the two workshops, because this is important for you to
okay.
understand too. The one
Mm-hmm.
that's free, we're going to just talk about what do you put into a narrative that gets the viewer's eyes. So how do you really, like, what word choices do you use? What tips and
Mm-hmm.
techniques can I give you to really get as many points as possible? The
Okay.
one that is talking about impact is how do you actually translate your story to
Mm-hmm.
explain to people what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's they're a little bit different. And so,
Mm-hmm.
what depending on what you need to do, I would say probably both are helpful for
Yeah.
you.
Both.
And so maybe just register for both of them, and then and that'll be, I think a good place for you to start moving forward with your grant applications. And then I also have, if I remember to pull it, I'll put a note to myself. I have a grant search, a free webinar that you can take, and that
Okay.
shows you how to search for grants.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Okay, yeah, let me make sure that I have your email address correctly.
Okay.
Okay, so what did you register? What email address did you register with?
I think it's my smartchill@gmail.com.
Okay, Mara Smart Chill. Okay, I'm gonna send you I have two free workshops on grants. One is on searching for them, and one is on planning on how you write it. And the planning one is kind of a precursor to the one today. so, so they'll be very complimentary for you when you go through those.
Okay. Thank you.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. Yeah. And I'll reach out to you just to make sure that you guys have the info for the mastermind.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. Thanks for joining today. Well, anyways, if
It was really, really good. You did a really good job. It was very informative. Thank you so much.
I am glad. I'm glad. Oh, and I see somebody just joined. Hold on. So I'll stay on, but feel free to reach out to me with any questions.
Okay. Okay.
Thanks. Bye. Bernadette, are you there? Bernadette? Oh, hopefully you're there, Bernadette. I'm hoping that you're there. So we recorded this session. We're actually at the end of this session. Hopefully you can hear me, and I'll send an email, but we recorded everything. So you'll see the replay come through your email, but we're just about to hop off right now. Just wanted to give you a second if you were there to be able to ask any questions or let me know what you were coming to the session for, so I can make sure to answer that right now and then send you the replay. All right. I don't hear Bernadette answering, and I don't see her typing in the chat. So we'll get ready to end, and then I'll make sure to send everybody the replay. So this has been our budget, basic budgeting 101. And we talked today about how do you go from ideas and the vision in your head into actual budget line items that you can put on paper and you can ask people for money for, or you can explain what you're going to do with your organization's budget. We talked today about activity-based budgeting and really differentiating that from the overall of what you're doing as an organization. And then we also talked about how do you break down the thoughts of what you want to do and putting them into the line items at the scale that you need to for your organization right now to be successful. So those were the main points of today's webinar. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me using the contact information in this recording. And if you have any further needs to better understand how you are doing your work, please feel free to book a clarity session with me. Yes, and Bernadette, so there's a recording and there's slides. And so in the email, you will receive both the recording and the slides, and you will see all of the stuff there that you need. There's no notes, but everything is in the slides and also in the recording. So if you have any questions after watching that, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll be happy to answer them. And then in the email, I always send a call, a link. So if you have any questions, you can book a 15-minute clarity call, and we'll go and talk about the questions that you have from this budgeting webinar, and also talk about your organization and what you need to be doing to move forward as a social entrepreneur. So thanks for coming. So sorry, Bernadette, that you got here at the end, but we are just happy that you came and happy to have had both of you join us today in the live. And if you're watching the recording, thank you for watching the recording. And I will be speaking to you all soon. So take care and have a wonderful day, everyone.